On this edition of Artifacts, a choreographer, a writer, dancer, translator, and a potter.
Not to mention a skateboarding chicken and a house that takes off like a rocket.
Yow, just the usual drama and intrigue.
Coming up on Artifacts next.
Hello everyone, I'm Phill Lindsay from the MCDA.
And I'm Zahn from the Office of Film, Video, and Recording. Welcome to Artifacts. Hey Phill, I hear it's a beautiful day in the Northeast neighborhood.
Yeah, you had to say that, didn't you? Well, that's true, and we've got some exciting developments centered around the Grain Belt Brewery area in Northeast Minneapolis. Lots of artists moving in, a new film and video soundstage, and related industries up there. And we're going to show you a special video about this arts mecca in the making.
We'll also introduce you to Kim Losse and Soltys from Harmony Scenic Studios. That's the company that built the soundstage in Northeast. Harmony specializes in special effects, and you'll get to see their demo reel, which contains some real wackiness worth watching.
But before that, choreographer Beth will join me to talk about her new work in progress, Painted Windows, and then I'll talk with Jelena Petrovic, who is a writer, a dancer, and a translator from the former Yugoslavia.
Phill will also converse with Keenan, who is a potter.
All that and more, starting with Beth Corning, up next right after this clip from Night of Questions.
Every moment you may, I'm afraid.
Try. I will help you. Now, why is this night different? Go on.
Why is this night different
From all other nights.
from all other nights?
So, now the whole sentence. Why is this night? Oh, repeat it.
Why is this night
Different
different
from all other nights.
from all other nights?
So, why is this night different from all other nights? Почему эта ночь не похожа на все другие ночи?
Well, that was a short clip, a little excerpt from Night of Questions, and we'll talk about that in a little bit with a guest who is back to Artifacts, and I'm very pleased to have Beth Corning with us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
And you're involved in an exciting ongoing project. It's a trilogy, actually.
Right.
That started out with the original dance that we saw a clip from, which was Night of Questions, but coming up is the Painted Windows?
Right, Painted Windows. Right.
Painted Windows.
Right.
What is this about? What are you working on?
Well, we've sort of, we as the royal we, I. Yeah.
You're never alone with schizophrenia,
No.
so go for it.
That's true. It keeps me very good company. It's called the Human Trilogy, and the reason why we called it that, we actually, because it really was sort of the company I'm talking through, and anybody who will listen to me when I'm working these things out. And the Human Trilogy is based on three very universal issues. One is tradition, one is community, and one is faith, and divided those up. And what it really stemmed from was the idea of working on a piece about growing up Jewish in America. And that came out of, I think, all sorts of things. One, maybe turning 40, where you start looking for answers again. And maybe moving to the Midwest, where suddenly nobody understood things like chutzpah, is like they did walking down the streets in New York.
Yeah.
And
far fewer people have chutzpah in the Midwest, I think.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Probably that. And also, I think the issue of what everybody calls my New York upfrontness, I think I'm beginning to realize is more of sort of having a Jewish soul.
Ah.
And I grew up in a very, very, very unreligious, unindoctrinated home. And the only reason I think I knew that I was Jewish was because we went to my cousin's bar mitzvahs, and I knew what gefilte fish was, and my non-Jewish boyfriends didn't. And when I started working on this first work, I realized it was much bigger than one work. And it's much bigger than three works, ultimately. But this way, I sort of divided it up for myself.
Okay.
The first one, although I don't want to call it part one, because you don't have to see them in sequence.
And indeed, with your upcoming run, you give people an opportunity to kind of
Right.
mix that. We'll talk about that in a
Right.
minute. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt. But
No, I mean,
That's
I think
interesting.
that it's so, we came up with Night of Questions, which deals with tradition,
yes.
which uses the Passover Seder, which is traditionally an evening, to ask questions. And the Jewish religion is about asking questions. We're not just sort of fed things going, believe this and don't ask. I think the Jewish religion is more about believe this. You can ask questions, we'll give you a lot of different answers, but you still have to believe it anyway. You know, but you can ask as many questions as you'd like.
And to some extent, that was for no other reason, but that's why I chose that one little
Right.
clip out of what you were nice
Well,
enough
that
to bring.
is the famous question. Why
That's
is
it.
this night different than any other
Yeah.
night? There are 4 questions on the Seder night that you ask.
Yeah. But now this, what isn't the second part, but the next one
Right,
in the
the next
series,
installment,
the
right.
next installment, apparently, from what I read, is going to look very different.
Very different.
And that sounds really exciting. Do you want to describe that a little bit?
Painted Windows is explores the issue of community, particularly in light of what the ideal community would be, what it was, what it is, maybe. I mean, I think that for me, the word community is such a buzzword, the 90s buzzword. To me, I have no idea what it means. I grew up, I traveled all my life. I've gone to about 23 different schools. You know, community, I don't know what that is. The community of man, the community of this. The
Or when
community
I
of
hear
that.
somebody say, well, the arts community or the scientific community, what I usually think of is what they mean is a self-interest group. It's
Well-
those folks that identify with something and say, yeah, I've got a piece of that, or I want a piece of that, and let's get together and talk
Well,
about
that's
it.
an interesting thing to say you identify with that, because I think ultimately that's the big thing in the 90s. How do you identify with something? Do we want to be labeled by something? And Painted Windows uses the paintings and the artwork of Marc Chagall.
Well, and that's the first thing that intrigued me, because just the image of that is going to be, I think, quite striking.
Well, yeah, I love his work. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, it's fantasy. It's, I mean, there's the figures float. There's no gravity.
Yeah.
There are people floating over houses. There's a great deal of childlike imagery, and a great deal of idealism in terms of his perspective on community.
Well, and didn't Chagall, now I'm maybe way off here, Jewish artists that worked often in Christian environments?
Some, yes. I mean,
I'm
he
thinking
did
of
a
some
lot.
churches
You're
and-
thinking of the windows that he
Yeah,
did, which
yeah.
were the big Chagall windows, which were indeed, he did church windows. In much of his, he came from a very small Jewish town in Russia, and ultimately there are, you know, you'll see in the paintings there will be these small little houses, and then there will be a church. Because there were churches in these Russian towns. I mean, this was not excluded.
That was the landscape.
Right, that was the landscape. And ultimately, this work is from a very assimilated point of view. I still remain the observer, as in the Night of Questions. There's this observer who keeps challenging all these. You know, how come? Well, these are my 4 questions. Who am I, what am I, where am I, and why am I? You know, it's not the, why is this night different than any other night? Why do we recline? You know, not the traditional questions. And ultimately, I think that this is not just a Jewish work. This is a very universal issue. In Night of Questions, for instance, we have J. Eros Powell as the narrator, African-American artist in town, with a voice like James Earl Jones. It's just a
got a
phenomenal
striking
voice.
voice, yeah.
Oh, and he did a beautiful job with the narration, a script that was written by Shelley Burke. So there was text in the first one. In the second one, there are stories. And the one thing about dealing with Jews is that you will get, if there are 5 Jews, you'll get 20 opinions, and you'll get that many stories.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Are the, who's dancing in this second installment? Same folks from the
The
first?
same folks. David Harris is the guest in Night of Questions, and in this one it's 7 company members. It is my company.
Harris got some good reviews, I heard, too.
Yes,
Yeah.
he did. They liked him.
Let's take a look at another clip you're nice
Sure.
enough to bring from the first piece,
Right,
Night of Questions. And then we'll
right.
come back and talk about that and
Sure.
other stuff.
Sure.
So another piece from Night of Questions from Beth Corning.
Great.
And
Thank you.
every excerpt, actually, I saw, I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
So, but this next piece, Painted Windows, is going to look different.
Yeah.
The
Very
sets,
different.
obviously, the Chagall, but the performers, the dancers, are in acrobatic
Well,
attire.
They're dressed, Chagall was transfixed by circus, and so am I. I mean,
Yeah.
I find it a metaphor for everything in my life. And I also think that it's a metaphor in many ways, the circus community, using that word, who travels all the time, who's within itself in a form of diaspora.
Yes.
There's also the kind of individuality that comes together in a circus. There's also the balancing act of balancing things. There's also the childlike, and everybody's in hand-painted costumes.
Oh, fun.
Marina Harris, who did the costumes for the clip that you saw in the clip,
Yeah.
and you also heard Jay Otis's voice, and I should say that that clip was done by Nancy Mason-Hauser.
Oh, fair enough. Well, we've got just a few moments
Sure.
left. Your run is what, the first 3 weeks essentially in March?
That's correct, at the Southern Theater.
Southern Theater, and I know that number is 340-1725.
You're good.
We just had Jeff Bartlett on, so we've been running
Right.
that, I think, for about 2 months now,
Right.
so that's good.
Yeah,
Um,
and and there's a choice. It opens with painted windows. It goes to Night of Questions, then it goes painted windows again. It runs Thursday through Sundays. There is a wonderful discount ticket. You can't beat it to see both shows, which comes down to only $8.
Oh, that's a
show,
real
which
bargain.
is $16 to see 2 shows. You can't, and you can even afford maybe even go out to dinner.
Yeah, and maybe if you see the first 2 weeks, and come back and see Painted Windows again.
Right. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
You can come see it 3 times.
That
Right.
sounds good.
Yeah.
When will we see the 3rd installment? Later this year, next year?
If I should live so long,
Yeah,
probably in '97.
97.
Yeah.
Good for you. Beth, thanks for
Thank you.
being on the show.
Thank you very much. for
Pleasure to
having
have you here.
me. Thanks. Thanks.
Well, Jelena Petrovic is my next guest, and she'll join me right after this arts quote from a recent article in the New York Times.
Here's the story of a lovely lady who was bringing up 3 very lovely girls. All of them had hair of gold, like their mother, the youngest one in curls. It's a story.
Well, last month in the New York Times, there was actually a rather sobering article about some trends that are happening in the arts, and we just pulled out one small fact that had to do with giving, as you just saw. So we may follow up on that at another time and have a conversation. But I'm pleased to have as my next guest, Jelena Petrovic, who's a relative newcomer to the Twin Cities, and actually before that, a relative newcomer to the United States. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here. And when I say a newcomer, you were raised at least partly in former Yugoslavia. And do you want to just spend a moment and
Sure.
share with us your odyssey? Because it wasn't only Yugoslavia, but a few other countries before you ended up here.
I grew up in Yugoslavia, or former Yugoslavia as it is now known, in what is now called Serbia. I grew up in Belgrade, and when I was 5, my family moved to Paris, where I attended school for a year. Then we moved to Tunisia in North Africa, and we lived there for 4 years, where I also attended primary school, French primary school, along with my brother. Then I'm really recapping here. This is
This is your life you're talking
nutshell.
about here, but yeah.
Right. Then we moved back to Yugoslavia, where I attended primary and secondary school. And finally, when I was 15, I was awarded a scholarship to attend an international high school in New Mexico called the Arm & Hammer United World College, which was a very progressive sort of school for kids from all over the world, about 72 different countries. And we spent 2 years in a very intensive academic and community sort of oriented program that eventually prepared us for college. And I attended Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. And right after that, I attended graduate school in the same area for a year, which I eventually withdrew from. And here I am.
And here you are. Well, actually, I'm struck and rather sobering, in a sense, to hear what I think most people would say, well, what an exciting cosmopolitan life, these various countries and all this and that. But when you were off in these other countries, my guess from over here in the United States was there was no great forewarning that your former homeland was going to be torn apart. Wasn't it rather sudden?
Well, some people would argue, among them was my history teacher in United World College,
Yes.
that Yugoslavia was one of those hotspots that nobody was paying any attention to. At the time, 1987 to 1989, a lot of things were happening that were indicative of what was about to happen, and a lot of historians and intellectuals were predicting this tragedy, but nobody really wanted to believe in it, partly because Yugoslavia, before 1989, before the Berlin Wall came down, before communism sort of died a slow and
Rather
violent death.
inelegant in any case.
Yugoslavia was considered the most progressive of socialist countries,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't affiliated with the Warsaw Pact. It was very independent, very sort of relatively free-thinking, and no one really thought that this very complicated conglomeration of nationalities. No one thought that this couldn't work out,
Yes,
and
yes.
things was sort of slowly reaching to a boiling point.
Yes,
and
the circle
when
wasn't
it happened,
holding.
some people, some people kind of were expecting it.
I suppose, yeah. Well, now, you and I first met over the phone last fall, and I think the first art discipline that I knew you were involved in is dance and choreography, but you also are a writer in your own right, and a translator. And you were telling me that you have, one of the most exciting projects you've been working on is a translation of a novel by a Serbian author, am I right? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The novel's name is Premeditated Murder, and the name of the author is Slobodan Selenic. He was, until he died in October, one of our most respected novelists, and also a professor at the university, a professor of dramatic arts at the University of Belgrade. And I was familiar with his work, and I'd been keeping up with it since I was in high school, but I was especially interested in this one novel that came out in 1992 in Belgrade called Premeditated Murder, because it dealt with a war in Yugoslavia.
So it came out of this tremendous upheaval that was going on in his homeland,
Right.
too, yeah.
And I was only 22 at the time, and I sort of had this wild idea that I could translate the novel. I had never really done anything of the sort, but there's a very sort of strong language or linguistic tradition in my family. Everyone speaks at least 2 foreign languages. My mother's a translator for an import-export firm in Belgrade, which is a technical translation, but there's a trend in the family. My brother works for a television studio in Belgrade, and he translates CNN news. And
But you're over here in the U.S. with this idea. How did you get back to the author?
I wrote to
or
him,
his people?
and I told him about my idea, and he said, sure, why not? He seemed very flexible, and I sent him a few drafts of a draft of a few chapters, and he read it and was very interested.
Well, good for you.
And so I finished the translation on my own time. Nobody had commissioned me to do this.
Labor of love, then.
Right.
Yes.
I quit a job as a waitress to do this, and I sent it to a few publishers, and a publisher called Harville Press of London bought the translation, the novel rights,
Right.
the English language rights,
So
and
it is to be published.
in May.
Well,
in
congratulations.
London.
You said something about possibly a movie coming out of this?
The movie has been filmed.
Oh, it has been
in-
filmed?
Has been
You're a
filmed.
fast mover here.
Right, and it's been shown, I believe, at the Berlin Film Festival, and it's going to Cannes this year. It's also called Premeditated Murder.
Okay, well, good choice. And
Good
this
choice.
is based on the original Serbian or your translation?
It's based on the original Serbian because the film is in Serbo-Croatian.
I see, okay. Well, congratulations to be
Thank you.
associated with such a project. And it was
Thank
on your
you.
initiative to simply write to this fellow, communicate with him, and said, I'm familiar with your book, and I'm a translator, and I'm out here. And you were in Minneapolis at the time?
No, I was in Massachusetts.
Oh, I see. But you
Right.
brought that with you and
Right,
completed it.
and I think that there's a kind of audacity and a kind of enthusiasm that comes with being 22 and thinking that you can just do anything.
Well, bless your heart. We need more of that. That's really
So
good.
I think that's, it's partly owing to that I actually did this project.
Well, and I would guess, too, though, if this is an accomplished writer, an author, and he read your translation, he didn't just do it out of charity. He said, yes, she can do a good job. So I
Right,
think that speaks
right.
well of what your translation was about. That's great.
And I'm at work on another novel, an older one of his, that there's a long way to go, but I'm hoping to get that published too, and hopefully it should be easier, both to get that second novel published and to sort of get my name out as a translator, given that I've
Yes.
already been. That I am about to be published.
Well, yes, I'm sure
So-
that's a good leg up.
But
Now, it's
it's-
interesting with your two interests in the arts here, one wing of which is writing, which is a very solitary struggle at the desk and the blank page
Right,
when you're
right.
creating it, and then dance, which is very much out there in front of people and stuff like that. Is that kind of an interesting balance for you, or?
Yes, and I think that I find it to be a great blessing because I get bored with I get bored with solitude, and writing is a solitary endeavor, like you said, and I think that it really balances me out psychologically. I like both things tremendously, and I can't really envision myself giving up either. You know, one may end up taking over a bigger part of my life, and the other one may end up being more of a, I can't say hobby because that's really not the right word, but
more of an avocation, though, something. That,
but I really like the fact that I enjoy both. Shall I call them art forms?
yes.
I'm not sure.
Both disciplines or
disciplines.
whatever. Yeah.
Translation is
Good
not
for you.
really considered an art form, but I find that it is quite artful.
I want to take the opportunity, since you're here and you come to us from actually more than one foreign point of view, to get your impression of the arts that you've seen, to some extent maybe in this country, which is a pretty broad canvas to look at, but especially in the Twin Cities. What's your impression of the vitality of it, the breadth of it, the future of it, whatever?
Well, one of the reasons I've been in the States, I should say, before I move on to Minneapolis since 1987, which is a relatively long time. It may well, you know, as years go by, it may be most of my life since I'm young. And I should say that, interestingly enough, dance is something that I've only been exposed to since I came to the U.S. I really wasn't familiar with dance as an art form when I was growing up in Yugoslavia.
Well, how does it compare?
Tunisia.
I mean,
Well,
to
Yugoslavia has a ballet tradition that's relatively had a ballet tradition that was relatively strong, I should say. I'm not really familiar with the situation now, but it really didn't have much of a modern dance tradition to speak of.
What's your impression here in the Twin Cities?
One of the reasons I moved here in September is because of friends who had been, you know, who are from here, who had been telling me that this is a very vibrant dance community. And because I'd been reading about Minneapolis in Dance Magazine, I think, ran a big issue on Minneapolis.
So that national reputation gave you at least a good reason.
Right,
to
and I
stop
think
over
that it's really, it's no longer a rumor. I think a lot of people have been in the past few years moving to Minneapolis, even from New York.
Yeah, well, as Beth Corning did at one point.
And a company called Shapiro and Smith who teach at the university. So I think it seems to be a trend. There's, you know, New York is getting perhaps oversaturated or getting past the point where it's, you know, comfortable for people to live and work. And people are moving here, it seems.
Well, that's good to hear. Jelena, we're out of time. Best of luck with your upcoming work in the translation field and your own writing. And of course in the dance too. Thank you so much. Pleasure.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, I'll be talking pottery with Lori Keenan in just a moment, but first a fun feature film fact. Stay tuned. Movies, 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 the glamour of that industry. Well, later on, we're going to be heading up into northeast Minneapolis and taking a look at some neat art things that are going on up there. But I'm pleased to have as my next guest a potter, a woman that I met a couple years ago. We started a long-distance correspondence, actually. Lori Keenan.
Hi.
Nice
glad
to have you here.
Phil.
Yes. And Lori is a potter and came here, I guess, most recently by way of Colorado, where you've been stationed for a while.
That's right. I wrote to you to find out what the arts community was like in the Twin Cities.
Right, so it really was kind of a cold contact. I mean, you really didn't know at the time.
Not very much about it. I'd visited the Twin Cities, and I liked it. I thought it was a beautiful place. And we had to move somewhere. So
and, you know, it wasn't cold enough and snowy enough in Colorado, so...
No, right. And I do love the cold and the snow.
You'd love it. Okay.
I'm very bored without it.
Is that right? Is that related all to being a potter, working with the earth and this...
I think it has to do with being anachronistic a little bit. I like the idea of having to deal with the elements.
Yeah.
Modern life is a little too convenient for me.
Well, to be serious for a moment, one of the things I like is the intense variety of seasons. I would go nuts if there wasn't a transition between a winter and a spring.
Really?
You know, going from that kind of brown to gritty of Southern California would drive me nuts too. So, well, anyway, welcome to Minnesota. You brought some lovely pieces here that we're going to
Thank
talk
you.
about in detail here, but let's start out with some real basics for those folks that, you know, maybe eat off pottery, potteryware, but don't know what a potter does. It's obviously more than pots. And people probably have their own particulars that they like to make, but what is the field of pottery?
Well, it's a, what do you call it, a subdivision of the field of ceramics. It's making functional things out of clay. If you're making pots, you can make them on a potter's wheel that a lot of people have seen at demonstrations at art fairs and things like that, or you can make slabs and shape them by laying them over something that's a shape that
Yes,
you want.
yes.
Or out of coils, which is a really traditional way to do it, building it up one coil at a time.
When you say traditional, almost ancient. I mean, that
Very,
that could
very
go back
ancient.
to.
The potter's wheel is quite ancient also. It's at least 2,000 years old.
I was unaware of that.
Yeah, and it was discovered independently in at least 4 different places in the world. And I'm sure there was some communication between those two.
Yeah.
Had not yet come into being in the Americas when the Europeans came. So I believe that most of the native cultures used coiling and pinching.
Well, now that amazes me. I've been to the American Southwest and seen some of these beautiful Mimbres pottery and things. And when you say that came out of the coiling technique, to
Coiling
my
and
untrained
scraping.
eye, I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, there's some amazing technique there. Very thin
Very
bowls,
thin, yeah.
pinched and coiled.
Beautiful stuff. Well, what got an otherwise sane young woman like yourself interested in doing pottery? You woke up one day and suddenly you said, I've got to be a potter.
Something like that,
Truly?
yes, yes. Well, I was, as an undergraduate, I was in fibers, so I was doing surface design and weaving and things like that, and I took pottery as one of my electives. And then I went back and took it again. And then I graduated. But when I was out in the world, I found that I really missed clay. I really wanted to be back to it. I thought about it all the time. So I went back to graduate school and then began really working clay seriously. I tell my students that I was sort of throwing impaired because it took me 3 years to really get control of clay on the wheel, and most people get it much faster than that.
Okay.
So I tell them
See,
if
I've
I can
paged-
learn, anybody can.
I paged through that old book, Centering, and it kind of the Zen approach to throwing and stuff. And to me, it would seem to take a lifetime to be able to get that thing down there and do that. So to me, 3 years sounds like a quick learn.
Well, thank you. Thanks. But it seemed like an enormous amount of time at the time. You know, I thought
Yeah.
it was never going to happen.
Well, sure. And with the passion you had for it, I mean, you probably wanted to be there now and
Right.
be glazing everything that you could do. Let's get right to what you brought, because this is just fascinating things. And when you pulled them out of your box that you brought them, I was happily surprised to see such wonderful things as shoes.
Shoes.
What the
Shoes.
heck's going on here, Laurie?
Well, I make shoes. Sometimes I make ladies' purses and hats and other sorts of accessories. Not to be a literal trompe-l'oeil type impersonation of a shoe, but because I think shoes say a lot about the people that wear them. They're and the culture that they exist in. You know,
Yeah.
if you think about the sort of person that might wear that shoe or a shoe like it.
First, she's very large.
This has a very large foot, a great deal of tolerance here and
Yeah,
there.
yeah, indeed. And an incredible arch, I would have to say that.
Right. Right. So, and I like to think about things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of an expression of your impression of folks, people.
Right. And there are a lot about gender, about gender and power. You
Okay.
know.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so there's a little political subtext going
I
on here
suppose
as
so.
well, yeah.
But I think they can be enjoyed on many levels, or at
Well,
least.
let's deconstruct this one a little bit then.
Ah.
Because I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm making some assumptions as you talk, and yet this is not a garish shoe. I mean, it's earth tones and almost looks like a biscuit here in the coloration. So this is not a garish, let's go out and dance
No.
kind of shoe.
It's this is more. I think of it as fleshy. It's a sort of a suntan color, you know, to be suggestive of something like that. And I would want it to be a shoe that you might want to touch.
Yeah, well, you do, because it has that soft, sort of inviting texture. It's not a glossy sheen or anything like that.
It's made. I start always with the sole when I make the shoe, and I put it up on something, on a little soda can or anything, and cut something in the shape of the sole of a shoe, a flat piece of clay, and lay it on there. Then usually I have 2 pinch pots, one to be the toe and one to be the heel.
So these are, from a layman now, remnants of pots? Is that what you're saying?
Oh,
As it
well,
were?
sort of. First I pinch out the pot, it's a little hollow ball,
Yeah,
and cut it in half
I see.
and attach it on there.
Right. So it's not really the remnants, but it harkens to
It's formed in a
that,
very
yeah.
similar way.
Yeah.
Right.
Fascinating. Okay, what else do you have here?
Well, this is a thrown pot. This one was thrown on the wheel in two parts. I throw the body of it and then measure the gap here, and then throw just a little shallow bowl that will become the lid. And
Okay.
ideally, lids don't wiggle around.
Right, right. So this, in essence, is a bowl on a jar, carefully formed. If you can hold this down just at this angle, the inside, of course, is a different color. And is there, talk about the glazing and how that works and choices you make there. Why you use one color or
This is
another?
my favorite glaze. It's the one that I use the most because the way that I fire in an electric
Now you're
kiln.
talking about the outside.
Mhm, Well,
Yeah.
they're actually the same.
Oh, they are? Okay.
I fire in an electric kiln, and it's very hard to get a glaze that, to be honest, does interesting things in an atmosphere where there's no carbon in it, where it's just an even amount of oxygen all the time. And I'm lucky in that this glaze, where it gets thick, you see how it sort of pools up
Oh, I
and
do.
turns different colors.
Yes. So it's the same glaze.
And on the inside here, the difference is that this has been coated with what's called a slip, a reddish-brown clay over the top of the white clay. And the glaze acts very different on the reddish-brown, which is reddish-brown because it has iron in it.
So I wasn't entirely off that the colors actually are somewhat different, but it's the same glaze, and it just reacts differently given
Right.
its condition. Well, that's fascinating. Now, you make these,
I do.
and how do people see them? You get out and around.
I go to art fairs. I've got the American Craft Council Fair at the Civic Center in St. Paul coming up soon.
Okay.
I
And that's a pretty prestigious
Well, I'm
fair.
excited about it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun, and you meet a lot of neat folks, you know, and it's a 4-day fair, so you have time to sort of get to know the people in the booths all around you.
Yeah.
It's, there's a sort of culture to art fairs, you know.
Right. Well, last year I ran into you happily at the Stone Arch Festival of the Arts right here in the
And
Minneapolis
I'm hoping
riverfront.
to do that one again this year.
Yeah, well, that was a fun event. That
It was.
great.
It was nice.
Yeah. How is it to try and make a living at this? Are you making a living through your craft, your
I
art?
teach pottery as well at the Bloomington Arts Center, and between the two, I
Yeah,
squeak by.
Squeak by, yeah. And you have a studio?
I have a studio on Front Avenue in St. Paul.
Right.
And people come by there sometimes, usually people that have met me at other art fairs or who have come to one of our studio sales and looking for gifts, things like that. It's, I suppose it's always been historically, you know, difficult to be an artist.
Yes.
Financially, not difficult in any emotional sense. I think we're luckier than a lot of people.
Well, and as you
that
said,
are-
you couldn't stay away from the artwork itself. You wanted to do it, so you
I
were kind
missed
of
it,
driven.
yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, most arts disciplines in the Twin Cities, anyhow, have a service organization of some sort. Composers Forum, Playwrights Center, the Loft, you name it. Is there a service umbrella that assists or is here to help potters or ceramicists?
Well, there's the Northern Clay Center that has studio access and information there. And Resources and Counseling for the Arts was really helpful for me when I first moved to the cities.
Yes, they they're kind of a good umbrella for lots of technical and getting started and business-oriented things.
A lot of
yeah.
cities don't have that.
Yeah,
They don't have a clearinghouse like that, so we're lucky here.
well, that is good. If there was one, I don't want to get just in terms of quantity or size, but if there was one pottery project that you wanted to complete, is there something that you aspire to do? One signature piece or series that...
I have in my mind right now, I mean, the answer to this question could change in a month or 3 months, or whenever I see you again, but right now I'm wanting to make a very tall boot, a shoe that's
So you're going to stay with the shoe
Yeah,
theme here, a tall boot.
a very tall one, yeah. I think there's a lot of, because I get very interested in the details, and I think
Yeah.
if it's bigger, then I have a lot more space to do things on.
Space to do things on the piece, but that must become a storage problem back at the studio if you've got a whole bunch of 5-foot boots hanging around.
Well, hopefully we'll sell
Are
some.
people, do people buy that sort of thing?
People have bought a few.
Yeah?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I suppose it takes a certain kind of person, I suppose, who has room in their house
Yeah.
for a 4-foot boot.
Yeah,
But
that sounds great.
I do sell a few.
Okay, well, that's good. Laurie Keenan, thank you very much. Maybe we'll keep an update going on current projects and things like that. And for folks who are interested, probably look for you at some of the better art fairs in the metro area.
Thank you. Thanks so
Okay.
much, Phil.
Thanks for being on the show. It was a
Glad to
pleasure.
be here.
Great. Well, Janet will be back in just a couple of minutes with her guests from the Harmony Scenic Studios up in Northeast Minneapolis. But first, as promised at the opening of the show, we'll invite you to check out the new and thriving arts community in Northeast Minneapolis, featured in this short video from the Minneapolis Community Development Agency.
The old sign reads 1891, and during most of the century that followed, the Grain Belt Brewery employed a lot of people who created a lot of beer. Today, a new group of people are here creating things other than beer: sculptures, paintings, fashion, sets for films and videos. The Minneapolis Community Development Agency has helped bring several arts-related businesses to the brewery in line with its goal of attracting more film, video, and recording businesses to the brewery and surrounding area. The MCDA is involved because
first, it enhances the Mississippi riverfront, which is something that we've had as an objective for the agency for a number of years. Second, it provides a new home to the arts community in Minneapolis. Third, it retains historic structures, which is very important to the richness of the city of Minneapolis.
one film-related business recently built a facility next to the brewery.
We build sets and special effects for film and television commercials. This area is a really good place to be with regards to doing film work. It's located centrally and with plans that the city has for developing the area for film.
There are more and more artists moving all over Northeast, but especially to the warehouse. The warehouse is really an excellent space for me. I've got 10 great windows, and the pillars are really far apart, so I've got a great space for painting.
You don't find spaces like this in contemporary, warehousey, suburban-y things, you know. The location is wonderful. I love the neighborhoody feeling.
My mission is to present a forum for art, whether it be music, whether it be paintings, drawings, performance, spoken word. The artists come here, and I think a lot are not just coming here to rent studio space, but a lot are coming here to live because it's a quiet, safe, and pretty clean neighborhood.
The warehouse is a very exciting evolution of a new arts community.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Janet Zahn, and with me here today is Kim Losse and Danny Soltys. Both are from Harmony Scenic, which is one of the new businesses that has opened up over in that Northeast neighborhood you just saw about on the video. Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad you guys are here. Glad you could take the
thanks a
time. Tell me a little bit about opening your shop in Northeast. Why did you choose that neighborhood?
Well, pretty much we were already plugged into the area. The old shop was on Quincy Avenue, and all of our vendors, lumber yards, printers are in that area. And it also makes it easier for our clients because being close to downtown, they're pretty much all housed downtown. So getting to us is easier for them. And with the help of the city, it was a comfortable transition.
Good place to be.
Yeah.
Good place to be. And you're not, you do lots of things at Harmony Scenic. It's not just a soundstage or a space. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah. Well, Harmony is custom tailored to fit the creative needs of the film video industry. But also there's a lot of talented people that are working there at this time that have enabled it to grow really fast, and so it's like a creative resource center also.
You do special effects? One thing you do?
Definitely. Mechanical effects. We have a full carpentry facility there. It's metalworking. We have a full paint, auto quality painting, the scenic generating. It's
kind of a center there for kind of a creative service center, so to speak.
Full service, yeah, definitely.
I think one of the best things that we can do right now, just to explain a little bit about what you do, is to watch your demo reel that you put together over the years. These are some of the wild and crazy special effects that you've done at Harmony Scenic. And I think people will really enjoy this. I think part of why we work on stuff like this or show some of this is people really have no idea that this kind of work is done here in Minneapolis, and it's a fine example of some fine work.
Okay,
So let's take a
great.
look, and then we'll talk about how the heck you did some of this
Yeah,
stuff.
that'd be fun.
Roll the tape. I'm just absolutely astounded. I want to know how you did every one of those, and I know we don't have time, but let's talk about a few of them. Actually, the most recent one we saw there at the very end was the billboard thing. How the heck did you do that?
Well, it's called a forced perspective, and the billboard that didn't move is an actual full-size billboard.
Right, that's the one on the left, okay.
Yep, and basically we had to figure out the sizes so they look the same, and what you're looking at is the billboard that moves is way in the foreground.
Right.
So the larger billboard is way back here, and basically I think the billboard that moved was probably 3 by 6, and then basically the road actually tapered down. You couldn't see that, and it was scenic out to look like. So basically if one of those rocks to the left was off by 2 inches, it would have looked all out of perspective.
Right.
And basically we shot the guy separately, and then in post they erased his legs, so that's kind of how that one worked. But it was very technical, and we had to be right on with the sizes.
And Kim, I wanted to ask you about that dishwasher one.
That was an interesting one. We had to recreate the actual interior mechanisms, working functions of a dishwasher. So the plates, the glasses were done out of acrylic, plexiglass, but in order to get that refractive quality in the top of the glasses, there was an insert built into the plex, and that was filled with distilled water, so that would give that light.
But this is all, and it's all actual size?
Actual size. There was a technician up on the top throwing soapy water down and spraying water through the place.
Fun job, yeah. So. That was really cool. The other one, well, there were just so many, but again, towards the end, there was that guy that got blown out back in his chair and then blown up against the wall.
That basically was a rotating room. The room is on pipes on an axis, and the camera and the lights are mounted, so everything spins.
The room spins.
The room spins, and he basically falls. The floor, or the back wall becomes the floor. And
right.
If you watch it closely, we had to build a rail so he could hang on to there. But yeah, the room just could spin all the way around.
Spinning rooms. You guys have great jobs. It sounds like way too much fun.
Very creative.
Do you enjoy what you do?
Absolutely.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. It's like a house of magic, you know, it's wonders. Every day there's a new project that might come in with a new challenge. And
How do you get projects? I mean, how do they come to your company?
I think it goes from an ad agency. It'll come back to us, and we'll get a chance to look at the storyboards and give it a bid. Then it goes back to their client. We're involved in the problem-solving situation.
We pretty much deal with the production companies. The ad agency goes to the production company, and then the production company comes to us. They'll send us storyboards, and then we create bids and try to figure out and solve their problems. And most of the jobs that come to Harmony, you see, are very technical, and that's why they come to Harmony, because we've pulled all these off over the years. And
yeah, it's since 1986, and there's like 10 years of experience now, and the jobs seem to go through a lot smoother.
How many spots have you done since 1986?
It's really amazing. I was talking to Jeff, and he was telling me yesterday that we've done up to close to 1,000 spots now.
So that's a little experience under the belt. Tell me a little bit about the facility and the sound stages there, size, type, what kinds of things do you offer?
Well, the entire facility is 31,069 square feet, and the soundstage makes up 4,800 square feet of that. It's a 60 by 80 room, 31 feet to the ceiling. We've got a hard wall site going in. It's just recently been soundproof, so we can do sound shoots in there. We have an effects pit in the floor. It's 20 feet wide by 10 feet long by 8 feet deep. So we can get the camera down below, and we're actually just bidding on a job to fill it full of water and have a shark cage in there.
Ooh. Tell me, I had a question that came to mind as you were talking about that a little bit, and I've forgotten what it was. Oh, that's really good. Well, tell me, I guess. Harmony has been around for a long time. You've been doing a lot of really fun and interesting work. What is it about, how have you maintained this business? Tell us a little bit about your staying power, why you think you've managed to hang in there and do this so well for so many years.
Well, a lot of it, I think, has to do with the talent and the tenacity of the people that work there. Extremely talented group of people, fairly young. And Harmony, I think, has never been afraid to try these unusual jobs and pull them off, and never been afraid of change, and convincing production companies to change, use computers, and just try all these unusual things and get it done. I think that's, it's basically the pool of people that we have there is why they're
How would you describe the industry that comes to the, you know, the larger production industry and the caliber of work, the boards that you see and the kind of the stuff that's coming in? Can you talk a little bit about the larger community that you work with?
This is kind of a tough one, but I think that with the new technology of the computer enabling the use of the digital backgrounds, it's kind of a new thing. So I guess that's one. It's I don't know if you have any.
Well, you know, I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is just kind of the opportunities that you have to do good work is coming. We have a strong agency community here in town, and you do get to see, obviously, you're seeing some wonderful stuff, some wonderful creative work that gives you creative opportunities as well.
Yeah, I think people don't realize how many commercials are shot here, right in Minneapolis, and there's a huge pool of people, cameramen to electricians to grips, I mean, producers. It's just a wonderfully talented town, and it's, with these facilities coming online, it's just more and more and more stuff's going to come.
And you get to work with all these people.
It's really exciting. From one day to another, you never know what's going to be there. When the actors are in, there was a spot last week where we had animals involving chimpanzees. We get pyros, flaming things every now and then. It's really a house of wonders again.
And you guys are certainly part of that too, and part of that creative process. And I appreciate your coming and talking about it a little bit today. And I wish you good luck. And I'm really glad you're in Northeast Minneapolis.
Well, thanks for having us.
You bet. Thanks for coming. Well, Phill will be back with me to wrap up the show in just a few seconds. Please stay tuned. Well, we are back together again. Welcome back, Phill.
Nice to see you. Nice segment with those guys.
Well, thanks. They're interesting. Good folks.
Yeah.
And also, just in relation to the bumper that everybody just saw regarding Hollywood 9, that is a great event. I don't know if you've ever been to it, but it's really fun.
I must admit, I haven't been there, but I hear a lot about it.
It's really a good one. And particularly, you know, the people that are planning that, they have 400 volunteers.
It's huge.
That pull that event together, and many, many sponsors, and all 100% of the profits go to several of the AIDS organizations.
Yeah, real good cause.
So it's really a good cause and loads of fun, particularly if you're a big movie buff and you love the Academy Awards, and it's, you know,
a minor point, but if you've never been to the theater,
yes,
that's worth seeing right there.
Yeah,
so get downtown and check it out.
See the deal. And actually, they're doing it at two venues this year. They're going to have live feeds back and forth from the State Theater and the General Cinema Theater and Planet Hollywood at Mall of America. So more people, more fun, good event.
Just don't drive in between, because you'll suddenly be getting...
That's right. Just go to one or the other. Tickets are available through Ticketmaster. The phone number is 989-5151. Or you can call the Orpheum or State Theater box offices, 339-7007. That's Hollywood 9.
Yeah, what a glamorous field, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But you know, speaking about the big bucks, I've got a little newsy note here.
Yes.
An artist has just been announced as being commissioned for the new Minneapolis courthouse. That's the federal courthouse being built across from City Hall downtown. Tom Arternes, who's a nationally known artist, has been commissioned for a piece of sculpture or some sort of public artwork out there. $346,000 commission, funded by the GSA, the Government Service Administration Art in Architecture program, and the courthouse is scheduled for completion in mid-December of this year. So I suppose soon after that you'll see that artwork out there.
Yeah, that's a cool building. It's been really fun to watch it go up. I know they're ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
I like the design
and
of it.
hopefully on budget, right?
Yes.
And this is another little newsy note that relates to one of our favorite people here at Artifacts. Actually, it relates to our director, our dear director, Miss Edith French. I was going through an old notebook, and I saw this, and I just thought, well, this looks interesting. It's entitled Artists and Animals. This is from 1983, folks. What was our director doing then?
My, she's old.
Yeah, or she used to be young. In conjunction with Wegmans World, an exhibit featuring photos of the artist's dog, Man Ray, the Walker, actually, I don't think the dog was named Man Ray. I think the artist was Man Ray. The Walker Art Center is presenting several programs on the theme of artists and their pets. Programs will feature poet Michael Dennis Brown and his German Shepherd Anna on January 8th. Now this is 1983. Filmmaker Edith French and her dog Sam on January 15th.
Wow, and I missed it.
We all missed it. I looked in my old calendars and I didn't go. So Edith, what an interesting life you've lived.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. Sam, one heck of a dog, I have to say too. So.
Yeah.
We just wanted you to know out there in TV viewing land that the entire crew here is just primed with artistic creativity and artistic temperament.
It's kind of scary walking in this room every day, but just because it's just like...
Which is why we don't, basically. So.
Right.
Anyhow, next month looks like another great show. I'm going to have some guests on to talk about SASE, which is a relatively new writers organization based here in Minneapolis. Carolyn Holbrook will be on, and some other guests.
And we'll have somebody from that fabulous film and video industry.
That's great.
As well,
yeah.
so it should be a good show. Thank you for watching. My name is Janet Zahn.
And I'm Phill Lindsay, so we'll see you next time on City Cable 34 and the Metro Channel 6 for Artifact.